Hey,
Welcome, Cheryl English.
thank you so much, Denise. It's wonderful to be here. So yes, my name is Cheryl English. I'm an advanced master gardener out of Wayne County. I attained my basic certification in 2001 and then my advanced certification in 2003. I'm also a master composter out of Macomb County. I don't remember when I did, I think it was 2011. I'm actually educated as an art historian and an archaeologist. And I actually have a business as I'm a potter. My company's called Black Cat Pottery. You can find me at www.blackcatpottery.com. And I've been doing pottery for 32 years, 32 and a half years. And a lot of my work focuses now on habitat enhancement, things like bird houses and toad houses and bird baths and bug bowls and stuff like this. Those are my favorite things to do because I really invested in trying to make habitat, uh, create more habitat on the planet for my customers. As a gardener, I'm also a gardener, and my focus as a gardener, I consult, I install, I do design, I do maintenance, and my focus is primarily, not quite exclusively, because I have one client that I do maintenance for who's not really into native plants, but she won't let me go, and she's my friend. But my focus is on helping my clients uh, establish, maintain, and increase their native biomass to provide habitat for the species that evolved here and upon which we depend for our lives, actually. So today we're going to talk about gardening for birds. And the great thing about gardening for birds is if you're gardening for birds, you're gardening for everybody else. So we're going to talk about gardening for the birds. And this is going to be strategies for supporting our native birds in their natural communities. Okay. And when you talk about natural communities, we're talking about all of the organisms that are part of where they live, where they raise their young, where they, have their life cycles, okay? A lot of the birds that we're going to talk about are what we call residential species. This means that they're here all year long. They're here breeding, they're here overwintering. But a lot of our birds are also what we call neotropical migrants. These are birds that come up here to North America from Central and South America for the sole purpose of breeding and burying young and raising them. And then they go back down to Central and South America, and they actually spend most of their lives not here. So this is a very expensive proposition for them to make this migration. There are also a few species that come that brood north of us and then come south to overwinter with us. Probably the best example of that I can think of commonly seen would be the dark-eyed junco, who they spend the winter here in Michigan, but then they go further north to bear their young. So the reason I wanted to put this talk together, I am a member of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, which is a wonderful organization out of Ithaca, New York, through part of Cornell University. And they have a quarterly publication. And in the fall of 2019, the cover story was, let me see if I can get this to work. 3 billion birds lost. Yeah, it's not going to work. Is it if I hold it like up here? No. Anyway, 3 billion birds lost in 50 years from 1970 to 2020. 3 billion birds lost. These are native species. And we talk about this, we're talking about 25% of our native birds. The least affected, relatively speaking, are our eastern forest birds, which is where most of our habitat would be considered eastern forest. The worst, not surprisingly, is our grassland birds. So a big part of that would be the Great Plains, where we do a lot of our agriculture, both livestock and growing things like wheat and corn and soybeans, et cetera. To give you an idea of some of our backyard birds that we commonly see, 1 in 4 blue jays gone, 1 in 4 rose-breasted grosbeaks. So blue jays are residential species. They stay all year. Grosbeaks, they migrate. Baltimore Orioles, 33% gone. Those also migrate. A third of our dark-eyed juncos, these migrate, but as I said, they come down here for the winter and breed further north. And of course, 1 in 3 of our white-throated sparrows, these are also neotropical migrants. These are just a few examples of what we've lost. And it's interesting because I'll get into a discussion on a page on Facebook about how many birds we've lost, and people will say, oh, there are plenty of birds. And I'll say, well, how old are you? And they'll say, well, I'm 23. I'm like, then you have no idea what you're talking about because you have not even been alive for half of the period of time this study period covers. So your concept of a lot of birds has nothing to do with what was going on 50 years ago. You don't have the context. So if we're going to do an overview of the presentation here, we're talking about establishing functional habitat. And this consists of 3 basic things: food, and that's for the adults and in order to raise young. A lot of times people talk about feeding the birds. They're talking about feeding the birds during the winter, the birds that overwinter here, and that's feeding the adults. They're not thinking about what do we need to do to support the next generation. Access to water, of course, goes without saying. Um, despite what the CEO of Nestle in Switzerland would say, we should all have access to clean, drinkable water. Regardless of species, regardless of economic status, water is an essential to life. It should not be something that is based on whether we deserve it or not by some constructed standard. And of course, shelter. And shelter has kind of 2 parts as well. It has shelter in terms of being able to raise young successfully, and also to overwinter wherever it is you may be overwintering. And this is about surviving and raising the next generation, because if you can't raise the next generation, you're going to go extinct. And that is what we are up against. So when we talk about forage for adult birds, different species rely on different sources of food, and there are species that eat different things at different times of the year, and there are species who eat different things all season long. And a lot of it has to do with availability, okay, seasonal availability. So they may be eating seeds, fruits, insects, or nectar. And for example, we think about nectar, those would be hummingbirds, but hummingbirds also are eating a lot of insects, and they're eating them on the wing as they're nectaring because they're insects that are trying to nectar on those flowers too, and the birds are utilizing those for protein. And that's just one example of that dynamic. We also need to provide food for baby birds, and the young of most of our songbirds, regardless as to what their parents may consume at any given time, are raised on native insects, particularly the larvae of native butterflies and moths. So we're talking about caterpillars. So the biggest threat to the ongoing survival of native songbird species, especially the neotropical migrants, is access to sufficient forage to raise their young. One kind of exception to this, they've been able to do some monitoring of nests with nest cams. And this is something that Cornell Lab is involved with and other organizations. And this is a means to monitor what goes into raising a clutch of eggs. So for example, we've determined that to raise a single clutch of chickadee eggs, and chickadees are pretty small birds. They're not the smallest birds. They're a little bigger than a house wren, not a lot. They're bigger than a hummingbird. But to raise a single clutch of chickadee eggs requires 6,000 to 9,000 to fledging. Okay, to getting out of the nest. Okay, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars. Now, there might not be like monarch caterpillars or cecropia moth caterpillars. They may be the little inchworm things that you see that drop down. Those aren't inchworms. They're little geometrid moth caterpillars. They're little tiny things. And if you've ever watched a video of a parent bird feeding the young, it is not a delicate operation. If you have to manage to find between 6,000 and 9,000 caterpillars to raise your babies, you are not taking a lot of time to, delicately drop each one in. You're doing this plunging action saying, eat it, I have to go get more now. So this is why caterpillars are so perfect, because first of all, nutritionally speaking, they have more protein, fat, and key nutrients than just about anything else. Plus, they have really soft bodies. So if you think about maybe shoving a longhorn beetle down a baby bird's throat, that would be very uncomfortable, painful, plus a lot of undigestible material from the wing cases and just bad stuff. Not great, not easily digested. But a caterpillar, soft-bodied, full of good stuff, great, perfect package in every possible way. So, in terms of forage for adult birds, some really valuable fruiting trees, shrubs, and vines include dogwoods, especially our shrubby dogwoods like our gray dogwood, red twig dogwood, silky dogwood, but also our flowering dogwood and pagoda dogwood. Those are our native dogwood tree species. Things in the rose family, including native crabapple and serviceberry. Serviceberry is fabulous. Serviceberry is a great plant in terms of landscape value, plus its ecological services. It has beautiful flowers that are key for early season pollinators. Great fruit that makes a great pie if you want to have a pie. Just follow a blueberry pie recipe. Um, Great fall color, wonderful structure in the winter. It's a great plant. Wild cherry species, wild cherry, black cherry, choke cherry. These are also really important plants for caterpillars, actually. Sassafras and spicebush. These are both dioecious plants, which means you have male and female, and you have to have both to get the fruit. They're also important host plants for butterflies and moths. Viburnums. Viburnums are interesting. They differ from sassafras and spicebush that they don't have gender, but they are what we call not self-fertile, which means a given plant can't fertilize its own flowers. So you need to have two different distinct plants, and they need to cross-pollinate to get fruit. And this is a strategy. There's so many strategies plants have evolved to increase genetic diversity within the species, increase the chance of getting your genetic material out there successfully, to just contribute to the overall success of the species in the environment. And this is another strategy. So if I can't fertilize my own flowers, I need to have someone else come in and do that. And that way I'm creating more genetic diversity within the pool. Elderberry species, both black elderberry and red elderberry, are really valuable also as nectar plants. Wild grape and moonseed vine, important as nectar plants and for fruit for the birds, and also Virginia creeper and poison ivy. Poison ivy, people hate poison ivy. I understand poison ivy, why they feel that way about poison ivy. Poison ivy is a critically important habitat plant because the berries are extremely high in lipids, which means they're very fatty, which means they're extraordinarily useful for our neotropical migrants. The berries are formed later in the season. They can load up on those berries, store up a lot of fat to be able to make that migration. The key thing is if you don't maybe want it, right around your house or anything, but if you have a large property, if it's in the back 40, leave it alone. It's supposed to be here. It has a purpose. It is not toxic. It is an allergen. I think it's uxorial is the chemical that is the allergen. And the only species that has a problem with that is our own Homo sapiens. And a third of us don't have a problem at all. A third of us have a mild reaction, and a third of us, like my dad, have a very, very strong reaction. And like any other allergen, if you're exposed to it enough, it can become systemic and problematic. So the key thing is to just follow appropriate protocols when you're dealing with this. One of the most important things is if you find it on your property in a place that you don't want it to be because you are going to be in there, your dog or whatever, don't ever burn it. Because if that chemical becomes airborne and you inhale it, you're going to be in a world of hurt. So in the upper left here, we have serviceberry blooming. And then upper right is maple leaf viburnum fruit late in the season. Lower left, I'm sorry, lower left, that's black chokeberry. But the foliage and the floofy things, that's actually Clematis virginiana, which is a completely different plant. And then lower right is Sambucus canadensis or Canadian elderberry. In terms of seed-bearing plants, Some of the best things for seed-bearing, seed-eating plant birds, things in the aster family, Symphotrichum. There used to be like Aster was the genus, and now with all this DNA sequencing, we're finding out more and more about how plants are related to one another. And we're finding out that our New World asters are quite a bit more distinct genetically from Old World asters than we realized. And so they've come up with these new genera that are extremely difficult to pronounce with lots and lots of letters. Instead of just Aster laevis, it's now Symphotrichum leve. You have Eurybia and Doolingaria. So it's I don't know why they had to come up with these names that were really hard to spell and say, but they did. Sunflowers, they're also technically in the aster family as opposed to the aster genus. So these are Helianthus species, and we think about sunflowers as Helianthus annuus, which is the annual sunflower that we all know and love. It's that beautiful flower that we get the sunflower seeds from, and you go to you can get cut flowers. They're just gorgeous, and they have lots and lots of beautiful cultivars and lots of different colors. Those are not native to Michigan, but we have a lot of perennial sunflowers that are native to Michigan. Let me think. Downy sunflower, woodland sunflower, which is really aggressive in my yard. Western sunflower, Jerusalem artichoke is actually a sunflower. Um, Giant sunflower is another one that I have had in my yard. And these are really important nectar plants and seed plants. Rosinweed. So these are rosinweed, cup plant, compass plant, and prairie dock, all Silphium species, really important both as nectar plants and as seed sources. And cup plant, Silphium perfoliatum, is actually designed to cup the leaves, clasp the stem, and it will capture water and hold water from a rainstorm for a little while after it's passed so that little organisms can still get a drink. Actually, I have a garden I maintain just outside of downtown Detroit that I was there on Saturday just after a rain, and I got a great picture of just a little bit of water around that stem, with the leaves around it, so the bees or whoever could get a drink safely. Rudbeckia species, there's at least four that I can think of. Rudbeckia hirta, Rudbeckia fulgida, Rudbeckia triloba, and Rudbeckia laciniata, all really important seed sources, and also, of course, nectar plants. The great thing about anything in the aster family, and all of these up through echinacea, these are all in the aster family, is you have long-term bloom because the petals are actually what we call the disc flower, I'm sorry, the ray flowers, and it's the center that's the disc flowers, and they have nectar, and they open sequentially over a number of days. So they're constantly providing new, fresh sources of nectar and pollen. Goldenrods also in the aster family. Goldenrods are also really important as host plants. Over 100 species of Lepidoptera host on our native goldenrods. And there's so many species of goldenrods, some that do very well in shade. Our blue stem goldenrod, our zigzag goldenrod do well in shade. There is a goldenrod that will work in your yard. I would caution you that unless you have a very large property, to stay away from Canada goldenrod, which is actually my favorite. And I have one Canada goldenrod plant that I tolerate on my property because I do love it. It's such a beautiful plant. It's the one that you typically see along the highway verges. It's so beautiful in the fall, well, late summer. Um, it's very aggressive. It sends out roots that just spread, and it just takes off. So it's a plant that you need to really be mindful of. But there are so many goldenrods, dozens of them, that there's going to be at least a few that'll work in your yard and be absolutely beautiful. Echinacea, there are two species native to Michigan, although they may be extirpated, meaning we no longer have any Michigan genetics. That's purple coneflower, Echinacea purpurea, and Echinacea pallida, or pale purple coneflower. Very popular with pollinators. And what I notice in the winter, so what happens I don't cut anything in my yard down in the fall. I leave everything up. And what happens is the overwintering birds that feed up on the seed heads, they scatter the seed on the ground. And the juncos, the dark-eyed juncos, they don't feed up on them. They are ground They are foraging on the ground. So what they are doing is they are going after that seed that has been scattered by the birds who feed up on the flower heads. So don't cut anything down. Don't cut anything down. Pea family plants, Desmodium, Desmodium candida. I've worked with 2 or 3 species of Desmodium. These are the tick trefoils. They're called tick trefoils because they have naked seeds. They don't actually have pods, and the seeds are kind of Velcro-like. And their seed dispersal strategies, I'm going to attach myself to a passing mammal, and then I'll drop off somewhere, and hopefully it'll be a good place for me to germinate. So that's an interesting seed dispersal strategy. So Desmodiums, showy tick trefoil is my favorite, Desmodium canadense. I've also worked with Desmodium illinoisense and Marylandicum, all beautiful plants. And there's other species that are within that family, but have different genera names. Chamaecrista fasciculata, or partridge pea, really popular with the birds. Also hugely popular with pollinators. It's actually an annual, and it's just really pretty. And its seed dispersal strategy is it does actually have pods, but when the pods dry, they burst open and they throw the seed from the mother plant, which of course is going to not come back next year because it's an annual. And that's how it gets its seed out there. A lot of pea family plants. Oh gosh, what is it? Wisteria does the same thing. And there is a native wisteria, not native to Michigan, but native south of here. Cercis canadensis, or eastern redbud, also great source. And the other thing about these pea family plants, particularly Desmodium and Cercis, is they're very popular with the leafcutter bees, and they will cut little circles out of the edge of the leaves to make their larval chambers when they're laying their eggs. So they like soft leaves, and these are perfect for the leafcutter bees. So another advantage to this plant. Grasses and sedges, a lot of them bear wonderful seed that is very attractive for the birds for food. Many of them are host plants for Lepidoptera. So up the upper left, we have Rudbeckia laciniata, or green-headed coneflower, which once it starts to go to seed, is extraordinarily popular with the goldfinches. And of course, the male goldfinches are almost exactly the same color as those flowers. Upper right, we have Echinacea purpurea. Lower left, we have cup plant, or Silphium perfoliatum. And then we have Helianthus giganteum, the giant sunflower in the lower right. In terms of nut-bearing plants, so we're talking about forage for guys like blue jays, particularly. Quercus, including white, swamp white, red, black, bur, northern pen, shingle oak. There are quite a few oak species native to Michigan. These are really important. They're important sources of nuts for our jays and other nut-eating species. Oaks are also one of the most important host plants for our native butterflies and moths. Across the country, over 500 species of Lepidoptera host on oak species. So keystone species in their environments. Walnut species, including black walnut and butternut, they also supply some, they also are host plants for some of the members of Lepidoptera in classification. And hickory species, Carya, including shellbark, shagbark, pig nut, etc. Also really important sources for nuts. In terms of nectar plants, so these are things that you would want to include in your yard if you wanted to provide forage for adult hummingbirds, our ruby-throated hummingbirds. Mertensia virginica, Virginia bluebells. And I've tried to kind of do these in kind of chronological order when they flower through the season, because they need forage all season long. So, get something early, middle, late, things so they overlap, so they have resources all season long. Keep in mind, bird reproductive dynamics vary significantly between species. Red-winged blackbirds, for example, the males are very promiscuous. They will probably have more than one nest and one lady, but they're also really, really, really good dads, and they take very good care of their girls and their young. They're very territorial. They're excellent dads. Hummingbird males, once the deed is done, they're gone. And mom has all the responsibility of raising those babies. So, and it runs the gamut. And the whole dynamic of getting to the nesting thing, the boys stake out territories, the girls decide who they think has a good territory, and she decides where they're going to nest. And he may even start a few nests, sort of, it's a whole location thing. And she may say, okay, nice territory, you've got good sources of water, you've got good sources of forage for us, you've got good sources of forage for the babies. But yeah, your house choices are not so great. We're going to be going over here and we're going to be nesting here. So she chooses and she decides, regardless. It's never his decision, regardless of how the entire dynamic plays out. So Mertensia virginica, as I said, Virginia bluebells, and Aquilegia canadensis, eastern columbine, these are early season sources for nectar. Lonicera species. Now, and when I say Lonicera species, I am referring to native honeysuckles, not Asian, Japanese or Tartarian. Those are terrible invasive species. Please stay away from them. I was talking with Denise earlier about how Michigan is not very good about educating and sort of enforcing regarding restriction of invasive species. It's really been left up to the consumer to be responsible, which is very confusing and difficult. Please stay away from exotic honeysuckle species, but there are some beautiful native ones, including Lonicera dioica, which is coral honeysuckle, which is absolutely gorgeous. I find it much more, the flowers are kind of red colored, much more beautiful to me than that white or yellow flowering thing. Blech. Sorry, that's totally personal. Just a much more attractive plant, and they have really useful fruit too. I've seen the cardinals on my um, native honeysuckle feeding on the berries. The berries are really red. Keep in mind that cardinals, their feathers are pigmented, so they need to consume fruits that are high in anthocyanins to keep that nice, brilliant red plumage. Blue jays, their plumage is actually a refractive process. So that blue is not the color of it's just how the light is refracted. But with cardinals, it is pigmented and it is based on nutritional content. Lupinus perennis or wild lupin, very good source of nectar. Also the host plant for the federally endangered Carner blue butterfly, which is native to Michigan. Penstemon species, Penstemon digitalis or foxglove beard tongue, and Penstemon hirsutus or hairy beard tongue are pretty well known here. They're in the sadly named figwort family. The figworts are really cool plants. I think I have early and late figwort, and if the flowers are so tiny, but if you look at them, you can see that they are definitely in the same family. They're just serving different sized pollinators. So little tiny pollinators are going for the figworts, whereas bigger guys are going for the penstemon species. Campanula, so this include American bellflower and Campanula rotundifolia. What is that called? Harebells. Really important for nectar. Lobelia species, this includes Lobelia cardinalis, which is very popular because it's red. Hummingbirds seem to like red. So Lobelia cardinalis is cardinal flower. Also Lobelia syphilitica or great blue lobelia. And I came across a new lobelia species that I did not know about last week. I went to a nursery up in Diamondale. Lobelia spicata, which is more diminutive, more restrained, little white flowers, absolutely delightful. I'm trying that out for the first time. I'm very excited. I kind of find it interesting. The lobelia seem to be kind of patriotic, red, white, and blue. So those are really good sources as well. Mimulus or monkey flower, Mimulus ringens, which is native monkey flower. Monarda species, including Monarda punctata, my favorite Monarda. If you can see, my cat has decided to help. Monarda fistulosa, those are probably the two most common. There's also Monarda didyma. It's native to Michigan, but it's not particularly widely dispersed through the state. Only a few counties historically have possessed it. Verbena or Veronica species. Verbena Utersifolia, which is the nettle-leaved verbena, Verbena hastata, and Verbena, stricta, blue vervain and hoary vervain, also really important. And then another really cool one, Impatiens capensis. And there's also another impatiens species, Impatiens pallida. These are the jewel weeds, and they're our native impatiens species. They are annuals. They're dehiscent seed like the partridge pea that they burst. Impatiens refers to if you touch the seed pod, it'll burst open. And it's also a common name for impatiens is touch me not for that reason. But these are also really important not host plants, nectar sources for hummingbirds. The interesting thing about jewelweeds is the sap of the plant is actually an antidote to the allergic reaction humans have to poison ivy. So if we want to look at some plants, nectar plants, we have Mertensia virginica at the upper left. In the center is jewelweed, Impatiens capensis. And if you look, this is the seed pod starting to develop here. And this little tiny attachment here is where the plant is attached to the flower. It's tiny. And the nectary is right here. So you have to have a nice long tongue. And that's what hummingbirds have, a nice long tongue to get to that nectary. This is the honeysuckle, the native honeysuckle I mentioned, Lonicera dioica. I think it's just marvelously beautiful color. This is cardinal flower in the lower left, Lobelia cardinalis, Penstemon digitalis or foxglove beard tongue in the center left, center bottom, sorry, and then dotted horsemint or Monarda punctata at the lower right. This is a really cool plant. You can see this is the flower here, and these are kind of like bracts. And this is the actual where the nectaries and everything are. And then the stem comes up through the center of the flower and it sets another flower, and it can set up to 5 flowers in sequence on that stem. It's really cool. So we need to provide forage for baby birds. We need host plants of native butterflies and moths so that they'll lay their eggs on those plants. And keep in mind, I know that there are people out there who raise butterflies and moths. I actually used to do that. And I had an aha moment where I realized that doing so was was a really bad idea. Because when you go out and you collect caterpillars and eggs and bring them in, we don't know if you're preserving the best genetics or the worst genetics or whatever. What we do know is that you're increasing the predation pressure on the organisms that you leave behind. So if you actually really want to help the monarch butterfly or any other lepidopteran species in your area, the best thing you can do is provide viable habitat. And that means providing host plants. It means turning off your nighttime lighting, put a sensor on it, use yellow light so that you're not putting moths on the menu for nighttime predation, and not using pesticides and other chemicals in your yard. Right now, I at night am enjoying the fireflies. Fireflies are actually beetles, and the larval stage lives in the soil and actually feeds on all sorts of nasty stuff you don't really want. And the adults do not feed. They don't have the means to feed. Their entire purpose once they emerge as adults is to make the next generation. And if you are using chemicals on your lawn, you are killing, if you're trying to eliminate beetle larvae in your lawn, you're killing fireflies. You are killing that next generation of fireflies, because that's what they are. They're beetles. So my yard, I get to see a light show right now every evening. It's fabulous. It's so beautiful. And I'm finding them in some of the other gardens. And I was working in a garden out in Chesterfield on Sunday. And I was over at a garden in Harper Woods today, seeing the fireflies. And it's just marvelous. So talking about caterpillars, though, as I said before, native oaks species support over 530 North American Lepidoptera species. These are moths and butterflies. And they may range from Cecropia moths, which are about that long as caterpillars and as almost as big as my thumb. They're huge. I actually did raise a few of those before I had my aha moment. They're amazing. Um, Down to little tiny little geometrid moths that are just maybe 3/4, a half an inch long, okay? Native willows and native cherries. Both of these, we are, and these numbers keep changing as we become more aware and learn more and more. But the willows and the cherries are sort of neck and neck, 450 or so species. And this is across the continent, okay? And what they're feeding on, what a certain species of butterfly or moth is feeding on as a larvae in one part of its range may not be identical to what's feeding on in another part of its range, okay? So some species, like monarch butterflies, are very specific to what they can consume. Monarch butterflies can only host on native milkweed species. Other species are less specific. Most species really do need native plants in order to raise their young. There are a couple exceptions. The black swallowtail butterfly can host successfully on members of the carrot family, including parsley, dill, fennel, carrots. And the reason they can do that is those plants are very, very similar to they have the same chemical signature, the same alkaloid as the plants that they evolved with here, including things such as Angelica species or Golden Alexanders or Zizia species. For the most part, our native caterpillars, 99% of them, need native plants in order to raise the next generation. And that means we need native plants to raise the next generation of our songbirds. Native birch species support over 410 North American lepidopteran species. This includes paper birch, um, river birch, which is not native to Michigan, that's native south of here. Yellow birch, bog birch, there are a number of smaller birch species that are resistant to the bronze birch borer. The paper birch, of course, is susceptible in the northern part of it, the southern part of its range. Poplar species, this includes eastern cottonwood, let me think, quaking aspen, and also big-tooth aspen, and native crabapple. So this is Malice. I actually have 2 native crab apples in my yard. These are in the rose family, and they support over 310 North American Lepidoptera species. So the more variety you can have, and a lot of these plants there are smaller willows. There's a prairie willow. We're not talking about the weeping willow here. That's not native. That's a European species. But there's prairie willow. There's a number of smaller willow species. They can get pretty big, some of them. Native cherries do get pretty big once they're, mature. Birches, they can be big trees, but they're short-lived, as are the poplars. Both birches and poplars are what we call pioneer species. They're the first trees to come into a prairie context, and they provide cover for the longer-lived hardwood trees such as oaks, beeches, and maples. So by the time the beeches and maples and oaks are kind of getting old enough to handle the sun and everything, that's when the birches and the poplars begin to die off. I refer to cottonwoods as the Jim Morrison of trees. They live fast and die young. And of course, crabapple, the native crabapple is not a particularly large tree. So there's a lot of different things you can do to provide habitat in different contexts. Trees, when I first started learning about this stuff, and I knew about the monarch butterfly and I knew about black swallowtails, and I thought that most of our butterflies and moths hosted on what we call forbs, which are herbaceous plants that die back to the ground. It's actually our woody plants that are really, really, really critical. That does not mean that our flowering plants, our forbs, aren't important as well. Dozens of genera of native forbs provide forage for our native lepidopteran species. The American lady butterfly, Vanessa virginiensis, hosts on pussy toes, pearly everlasting. Those two genera are both perennials, and then also sweet everlasting, which is an annual. Eastern comma and question mark host on nettles as well as elm. So elm also provides forage to mourning cloak butterflies. The great spangled fritillary butterfly hosts on violet species. There are people who hate violets, and I don't understand that. They're like, they're so aggressive, and yeah, they're successful. They don't need our help. And they're pretty, they're green, and they have pretty flowers, and they have a really cool reproductive strategy. You know, what's not to cool? They're really cool. And they're a host plant for this beautiful butterfly, you know? Monarchs exclusively host on milkweed species. There is a whole guild of insects that are associated with milkweeds. Milkweed bugs, milkweed beetles, milkweed tussock moth, those are just examples, as well as the monarch butterfly. At some point in all of these insects' life cycles, they are orange and black. And that is an advertisement to everyone else that you do not want to eat me because you're going to vomit if you do. The alkaloid in milkweed, it's a cardiac glycoside, which if you eat enough of it, yes, you will have cardiac problems. But before you even get to that point, it's also an emetic, a violent emetic. And the idea is that, yes, you may successfully ingest one monarch butterfly, you will never do it again. And that's what toxicity is about. Toxicity isn't necessarily about killing something to make it stop, because then it's a flat learning curve. There's no learning curve. It's like squirrels and cars. There's no learning curve there. I don't need to kill you. Actually, that's not a great idea, because what I want to do is give you a bad experience so you don't do it again. And maybe you can tell your kids, don't do it again. Don't do what I did. Okay. That's an effective strategy. So I'm going to make you have a really bad, very memorable experience so that you won't do that again. Okay. Gray hair streaks host on bush clovers and tick trefoils. I talked about showy tick trefoil, the Desmodium species. The dusted skipper hosts on big bluestem and little bluestem. And as I said before, over 130 Lepidoptera species host on native goldenrods. So that's one of the reasons I could tolerate my one Canada goldenrod, is because I know it's a host plant, and it also sometimes gets goldenrod gall, which means it's providing some little bit of protein for the chickadees in the winter. So I want to tell you, most of these pictures that I'm showing you that are so beautiful were actually taken in my yard by my friend Don Schulte. So the exception would be this one of the oaks. That's not a very good picture, but it does show you an oak. This is a monarch butterfly, and it is actually nectaring on common milkweed, which would be one of its host plants as well. And then this is spice bush, Liriodendron. No, not Liriodendron. Oh, Lindera benzoin, sorry. Which is a host plant along with sassafras for the spice bush swallowtail. This is golden Alexander's, or Zizia aurea, one of the native host plants for the black swallowtail butterfly. And then this is white oak, Quercus alba, which is a really important, if you can only plant one big tree, plant an oak, plant a white oak. There's a great book, I don't know if I have it. There's a great book by Doug Tallamy called The Nature of Oaks. And he goes through the entire year. I think he starts in November. I don't remember why, but that's when he started talking about doing this. Talks about the ecological services that oak trees provide to the planet, and that includes for human beings too. So, water. This is really important. We need to have a clean source of water for all forms of life. Need clean sources of water. Birds use water to bathe as well as to drink. And so what you want to do is you want to provide access to water, and you can do it a few different ways. Provide some bird baths. And keep in mind that birds will not get into a bird bath that's too deep for them. So you might want to have some that are different. You know, little birds are going to need littler bird baths, and bigger birds can handle bigger bird baths. I make these bird bowls of haying that the birds love, and they're not so deep that the little birds can use them. They have parts that aren't really glazed so that they can grip and they can feel safe and enjoy themselves, have a good bath, no worries. Think about bird anatomy. They don't have pads like we do. They only have little talons. So slippery surfaces are dangerous and scary. So make sure that there's places that they can perch or feel safe. Change the water frequently to remove possible sources of infection and reduce mosquito populations, and locate it within a clear space so that the birds will feel safe. So they're not worried about lurking predators, which would probably be felines. A bird bath with a fountain is highly favored. I have one in my backyard outside my bedroom window, which I love the sound of it. And that's critical. The sound of running water will attract the birds. They'll know there's a place I can get a drink and a bath. And what's really cool is like the hummingbirds, they will perch on the edge of the fountain and they'll do this movement like this to sluice the water over themselves for a bath. But when they're drinking, they hover. The water comes down the sides of this fountain thing. They'll hover and drink on the wing. And it's just that my cats look out the window like, what the heck is that? They can't, they're like, is it a big bug? Is it a little is that a little, really little bird? You know, they're perplexed by it. And I also mentioned how cup plant can provide a short-term water source after a rainstorm has passed for whoever might need a little drink. In terms of shelter, we're talking about two different things. We're talking in terms of spring and summer, we're talking nesting, because once you get into later summer, they're not breeding again. Okay, our residential species, including chickadees, blue jays, they might be able to raise more than one brood, but our neotropical migrants, by and large, raise a single brood of young, and then they're going to head back down south. It's a very expensive proposition, and that proposition is based on the presence of moths, of caterpillars. That entire dynamic evolved because economically speaking, when it evolved, it was worth the effort of flying all the way up here to raise their young on this highly nutritious source of food. And the collapse of that food source is what is leading to the collapse of our bird populations, especially our neotropical migrants. So we need nesting accommodations to raise young, and we also need overwintering roosting habitat for our birds who spend the winter here. Our resident species and birds such as dark-eyed juncos who come south to Michigan to spend the winter. Think about, I talked a little bit about, different bird species use different strategies to raise their young. Many of them build nests in trees. My gardening client in Harper Woods, she texts me a lot because she's learning all this stuff and it's just been a great experience to her. And she'll text me, I was out there working in there was a robin who was attacking me and, bombing me and, could there be a nest on the ground? I said, well, he's got a nest nearby, probably in the crabapple tree that's over where you were working. He's thinking you're a threat because you're near his nest. So you can often see the remains of these nests in the early spring before the deciduous trees leaf out. And different species, different habitats, different types of trees or different heights, closer or further from the ground. In shrubby context, some in, the canopy. And some in evergreen cover. For example, hummingbirds prefer things like arborvitaes and junipers. Individuals of some species will return to the same nest. If they're breeding more than, the residential species, they may have more than one brood in a year, and they may have it in the same nest, or they may move around. They may build on the previous nest as they carry on from one brood or one season to the next. I make birdhouses, and one of the pushbacks I get, because you can't make an access in a ceramic birdhouse. And I get this, well, there's no access for me to clean it out. Okay, when you're making a birdhouse is replacing, I'm sorry, excuse me, habitat we typically destroy. They're for cavity nesting birds such as chickadees and house wrens. And these are what we call succession nesters. They take over nest holes that have been excavated by the smaller woodpeckers, the downy and hairy woodpeckers. And so these are up in dead trees and dead limbs, and no one's going up there to clean those out for them. They are perfectly capable of cleaning out their own nesting holes. They're perfectly capable of cleaning out a birdhouse. So you don't need to have an access for us to clean out that birdhouse. So, that kind of feeds into the issues down here under nesting in cavities. If you can leave dead trees and limbs in the landscape, if you have a larger property, maybe unless they're going to threaten a building or some access, try to leave them. They are important habitat in many ways. in many ways, not just in terms of cavity nesting birds, but also in terms of providing forage for various insect species. And let's be honest, insects are the building blocks of life. They are the organisms that are most responsible for converting um, plant tissue into available protein for the rest of us to utilize in various ways. Different species may use different accommodations for nesting. Most will, they'll still build a nest, however rudimentary. Mourning doves, for example, their nests are pretty spare. Um, Baltimore Orioles construct extremely complex nests that are kind of hanging bags using all sorts of different fibers, including stripping fibers from milkweed plants, which is why I don't cut my milkweed plants down. And so the nesting dynamics vary in a number of different ways to a great extent. If they all need access to safe nesting materials, and so you can provide organic materials such as animal fur and feathers. You can use pet fur, but make sure that you're not using it if your animal has been treated with any kind of pesticide, including any and all flea and tick treatments. I have 6 cats I live with. Actually, I live with 6 cats. They don't live with me, I live with them. They don't leave. I'm the one who goes out of the house. And occasionally we have experienced flea infestations. They don't go out, okay? But I can bring a flea in on my clothing if I've been working in the yard. And so we're actually dealing with a flea infestation right now. Treated my cats a couple weeks ago, been watching and combing every day. I will not use the fur that I take off of them for 6 months. I will put it in the garbage. It will not be something that I save, just to be absolutely certain that I am not passing on any pathogens or pesticides to the birds who might use that material. You can forage for wild animal fur. I have friends up in the UP who sometimes forage for deer fur, that when the deer, rub to get their winter coats off, they'll pick it up off the trees and send it to me. Think about things like pine straw, cattail fluff, ornamental grass trimmings. Um, Purchase Excelsior, coir, or mosses. Actually, I want to change this. I would not use any commercially obtained mosses because they are not being sustainably harvested. Robin Wall Kimmerer wrote a fabulous book titled Gathering Moss. And she talks about how we are not, when people go and harvest moss, which takes decades to grow, they strip it all off. They don't leave anything to help regenerate the moss. And this is not a great strategy. It's not sustainable. Think about things that are natural fibers: wool, cotton, jute, raffia, or silk fibers, yarn, twine, and thread, but cut it into small pieces so that it can't get wound around a baby bird's leg or neck and cause a problem. Don't use any synthetics, nothing that's petroleum based. Things that you should not use: anything that's treated with any kind of chemical or pesticide. It will kill the babies. It will kill the parents. Don't use dryer lint. The reason you don't want to use dryer lint, it doesn't dry. It gets wet, it stays wet, the babies get hypothermia and they die. So don't use dryer lint. And don't use anything petrochemically based. And you want to provide nesting material starting around the mid-March. They're not going to use it yet, but it becomes an important feature in the boy birds locations in terms of finding a good territory. It may make the difference into whether he's successful in breeding with a valuable female or not. That presence of nesting materials may be the tipping point, the selling point that clinches the deal for him. In terms of wintertime roosting, overwintering species. So these are things such as chickadees and cardinals and blue jays and dark-eyed juncos. They need roosting habitats to survive our winter conditions. So what they do is they congregate together in protected contexts to maximize their mutual warmth, and they'll kind of floof up their feathers, but they're clubbing up to keep warm. And generally speaking, birdhouses are not utilized as roosting habitat because you can't really club up in there, or else you're going to suffocate. So it's not a great thing. Bluebirds are known to utilize them, but keep in mind, bluebird houses are usually not in a woodland context, and you would usually put for a birdhouse for a wren or a chickadee, you're going to be put it in a woodland context because that is where they nest. So you can provide a variety of cover using things such as evergreen species, including arborvitae, spruces, firs, pines, junipers. These are great sources for winter cover. This is the one area where my yard falls short. I do not have anything like this in my yard. I have everything else the average native bird would want. Water, forage of all kinds of foods, seeds, nuts, fruits, nectar, lots and lots and lots of host plants from oaks to sassafras to spice bush to grasses and mosses and ferns, whatever. But I don't have any of this. But both houses 2 doors down from me do have arborvitaes. So within short flight distance of my house, there are accommodations. So it's okay. It is okay. They have a place they can roost, and then they can come over to Cheryl's house and get a drink and get a meal and hang out with their friends, and then they can go back to their rooms 2 doors down. Final considerations, exterior lighting. Okay. Exterior lighting is a huge environmental disruption for plants and animals, and this includes human beings. We are obsessed with exterior night lighting, and these choices can have a profound negative effect on the life cycles and survival of native species. Nocturnal species are disrupted because they are more exposed to predation. We do not understand, we still haven't figured out why. I mean, we haven't been able to figure out how cats purr. It's one of the ongoing mysteries, and I think they're very proud of that fact that we haven't been able to figure that out. We don't know why moths circle light, but we know they do it, and we also know that they can exhaust themselves doing that rather than out nectaring and reproducing, and it also exposes them to predation by nocturnal predatory species, including our native bats. So if you have to have external light at night, I mean, I don't have any that I only have external. If I go outside and need to do something, I'll turn on the light, do what I need to do, and I turn the light off and I come back in. My strategy for someone coming into my yard is I put out a bunch of plants that you don't want to run into, like prickly ash and prickly pear cactus. All right, come on in. Let's see how that goes. If you have to have exterior lighting on, put it on a motion sensor and put it on, if you can calibrate the motion sensor to look for something that's at least 100 pounds instead of the passing raccoon or possum or what have you, do that. And if you're going to have exterior lighting, use warm light. Blue light is the worst. LED lights, I know they're very efficient. That's wonderful. Use warm bulbs outside. They don't attract as much attention like those, the bug lights, the yellow bug lights. That's what we're talking about. The insects don't react to that. They react to blue light, and that is the light that is most disruptive. That's the light that our computer screens and our tablets and our phones produce. And that is why they tell us, turn it off an hour before you go to bed. I know I'm not good about it myself. I'm sorry. I just have a hard time. But it disrupts our sleep patterns. And that's one of the reasons that we are dealing with a sleep deficit in human culture. Let's not contribute to that sleep deficit for everybody else. Minimize your exterior lighting and utilize appropriate technology to make it as friendly as possible for the rest of the environment. Significant vectors for bird mortality. The domesticated cat, of whom we have an example right here. This is Perry or Pericles. They are, if not the most significant vector for avian mortality, they are certainly in the top 5, top 2. They are the top one, actually. Okay, this is an invasive species. Okay, we are an invasive species, actually, as well. We introduced these guys. The organisms in the Western Hemisphere did not evolve with an animal like this, with the capacities this animal possesses. There are 1,000 things on his menu if he's outside. Okay, 1,000 things. Every single bird, every squirrel, everything is on the menu. Keep your cats indoors. If you have feral or stray cats in your community, do a TNR, which is a trap, neuter, return, to reduce populations over time. This guy actually I found in my yard back in 2020. Of the 6 cats I'm living with now, let's see, Rufus, 4 of the 6 are cats that I trapped on my property and have homed here. And there are more that I've done over the years. So work with your local nonprofits to address strays and ferals in your community. And if you have cats, keep them indoors always. The statistics for what cats do out there is they're terrifying. What they can do. So please keep your cats indoors and work with local nonprofits to address the strays and ferals in your community. Some print resources that you can look into. Doug Tallamy, Bring Nature Home is a really great place to start. Nature's Best Hope. I've actually got that one here. Is that, yeah, there we go. And he's got another one that just came out that I should put on here called How Can I Help? Which is addressing questions that came out of this book. It was just published in April by Timber Press. George Adams, Gardening for the Birds, and also Mariette Nowak, Birdscaping in the Midwest, all give great ideas for how you can make your garden a more welcoming place for our native birds. And when you're gardening for birds, you are gardening for everybody else. You're gardening for the native insects. You're gardening for the native mammals. I mean, everyone is welcome here. I don't like the people very much. I don't want people coming to my yard too much. No, I invite them in. I'll invite them on certain days, but everybody else is welcome. I've had squirrels and possums and raccoons at different times living in my garage, and I've had conversations with them about how that's not a really great idea long term, because that's where my kills are, and there's a lot of off gassing that would be very bad for you. And they've all moved on. But I don't need to get aggressive with them. I don't need to scare them. We just have to work through it. And, I do try to address the feral and stray cat situation in my community. And I put food out and work to trap. I also am very careful not to put food out in the late in the day. I don't want the wildlife to depend on that cat food, but there's plenty in my yard. I have a pin oak. I have American hazelnut, which is the coolest plant. And the way the thing fruits is really awesome. I'm never going to eat one of those hazelnuts. Okay, I'm never going to have a chance. I didn't get anything off my service berry to speak of this year because I didn't have time. The robins ate everything. Great, wonderful. That's what I want to have happen. If you're gardening for birds, you are gardening for everybody, and it's a cool thing. Nothing in nature occurs in isolation. Everything is interconnected, and that includes us. And my sense of urgency has to do with the fact that I recognize that the version of the planet we need to survive as a species is in danger. And that danger is us. We are destroying the planet. The irony of it is we are supposedly the most intelligent organism that has ever existed on this planet, and we are the only organism that has ever been responsible for the extinction of another. And we are the first organism that has actually set out to destroy the planet we need to survive. Our engagement with the planet is in direct conflict with our actual role. If we were to go away, with the exception of nuclear plants, the planet would be fine. If human beings were to rapture away to wherever, everybody else would be fine. We contribute nothing to the ongoing health of the planet. We actually detract from that. And yet our behavior is in direct opposition to that reality. And so I work in my own space and with my clients, and in terms of my education programs, is to help people be able to contribute to the planet's health, to the survival not only of our own species, but every other species. If you plant it, I guarantee it, they will come. I tend to garden, just as I said, I was talking with Denise, just outside of downtown Detroit at a church campus at Christ Church, Detroit. It's a garden that I designed and installed back in 2014. I was not responsible for maintaining that garden for several years until just after the pandemic, at 21 or 22. I think it was 21 that I started maintaining it because the woman who had been maintaining it um, broke her wrist, and her husband had retired and they were going to move to their second home out to the west side of the state. And so she contacted me and asked if I would be willing to maintain this garden, take this on. And I have a friend who sometimes helps me when she's available, not always, but sometimes, and she's marvelous to work with. She's been a mentor in my journey, learning about native plants. But I got down there on Saturday. I've been getting down there really early in the day to beat the heat. And I got down there at 6:30 on Saturday morning. It's wonderful coming downtown on a Saturday morning at 6:30. It's so nice and quiet. Um,
Mhm.
and I am so grateful I got down there at exactly that time because I walked into that garden, got my tools in, locked the gate, get to work, and the first thing I see in there is a hummingbird clearwing moth in that garden. I saw 4 bee species, including a honeybee in there, 2 bumblebee species, a honeybee, and then another ground nesting bee that it was moving too fast. I couldn't get a picture of it. Um, a juvenile grasshopper and a beautiful golden dragonfly within a 3-hour window in that tiny little garden just outside of downtown Detroit. If you plant it, they will come.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This was very educational.
Well, thank you. I'm glad we could do this.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
Did you have any questions?
I have a lot of poison ivy in my yard because I told you it's an older house and
Uh-huh.
it's already there. And it's funny because the lady next door who has honeysuckle and all this stuff and all these things for birds, um, I had mentioned to her that we have a ton of poison ivy. And she goes, "Oh, really?" I'm like, "It's coming from your yard." But she's considerably older than me, and she has
Uh-huh.
a lot of vines and all that that grow,
Uh-huh.
So,
Yeah. Yeah.
but she probably doesn't mess with the fence and the side of the yard. It's because
Right.
we're in my bushes, and my sister
Oh
went to
no.
trim the bushes when we bought the house, and she got poison ivy everywhere,
Oh no.
So I felt really bad about it. So I've been trying to get rid of it, but it's not easy to get rid of the poison ivy. I feel like it's probably supposed to be there.
Well, ecologically speaking, yes, it's supposed to be there. Um, if it's an area that you feel you must maintain, there are protocols for removing it. If it's in your neighbor's yard, that's going to be challenging. You're not going to be able to get rid of it if it's rooted in your neighbor's yard.
Right.
Um, the other thing that happens is that as you know, because it's the birds eat the fruit and they excrete the seeds.
Sure.
And so if it pops, it'll pop up other places. And then the thing to do, what I always use, I had a garden actually in Grosse Pointe Farms that I tended that had some poison ivy. And so the protocol I used for that um, is I would, and knowing this is someone else's yard, so it was a little more complicated than if it was my yard. So if it were my yard, what I would do is I would be wearing clothes. I would have sleeves down to my wrists, gloves covering, okay, everything covered,
Uh-huh.
and pull out everything that you can. That is where you don't, that you really need it not to be. And as I
Uh-huh.
said, if there's a part of your yard that you can let it be there, okay? Um, put it into like a plastic grocery bag
Uh-huh.
and put it in the garbage. And use disposable gloves, like nitrile gloves or something doing this.
Sure.
And when you
Uh-huh.
strip them off inside out,
Right.
inside
Right.
each other, throw those away.
Uh-huh.
Then um, go in your house, go down to go wherever your laundry is
Uh-huh.
and strip down.
Put it right in the wash.
put it right into the wash, and then use and then go you wash yourself and
Hmm.
follow the appropriate protocols for washing yourself. Now, your clothing and your gloves are that's where your risk is. That's why you're
Hmm.
getting those off. It's if you've been really careful in how you've been doing this removal, you might
Hmm.
not have anything on your skin, but you want to be careful that you don't. And if you said your sister had a bad reaction,
Yeah, well, yeah, it was everywhere. And I know my husband, because when we first moved here, he had never seen poison ivy,
mm,
and he was cutting grass and went right through a bunch of poison ivy. I mean, so he actually gets poison ivy if he's even near it. He doesn't
right,
even have to touch it. So
right. So he's
he is so afraid now
yeah,
that we have it in the yard, so he
yeah.
won't even go near that area to cut.
No, and he shouldn't. He should not. He should not. Um, so it's likely, I don't know how, I don't know how the genetics play out, but I'm thinking if your sister is extremely allergic, it could be that you would be too.
I mean, I don't know that she was. I just know that she had it all over her arms, and she was, because she's a hairdresser, so she was like, "Oh my
Oh
gosh,"
God. Oh God.
Yeah. So I felt
Oh,
really bad about it because I didn't even know we had it,
right.
And
Yeah.
of
Oh
course,
yeah. Oh
my
yeah.
daughter who gets it every year because
Oh,
she loves gardening and she does, she sells fruits and vegetables and that's her thing,
oh
so she's
wow.
always pulling things and she always gets poison ivy every year, sometimes more than once, and she knows what to look for.
There are I've seen these really cool like sleeve things, farmer's protection or something.
Uh-huh.
My friend Susan swears by them, and I wonder they're really good for, I think, protection from the sun, and they help prevent you from getting scratched. I wonder if those might be really useful for your daughter.
Yeah, that's I will suggest that because
Yeah.
she needs to not garden in her bare hands. She needs to make
Oh,
sure
well,
she's
that goes without saying. Okay,
no.
that's a whole other thing because I understand the wanting to garden with bare hands because the soil does have stuff in it that's good for you. It also has tetanus.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and as conflicted as I feel about it, I use nitrile gloves, but I use them until they break.
Right,
Okay.
right.
Because I work in clay. My
Mhm.
skin gets so dry. I can work in clay from late spring to early fall without gloves and I'll be all right. But you know, from early fall to late spring coming around, I
Uh-huh.
have to wear gloves or else my hands are horrible because they get so dry. But also I like the natural gloves. They seem to be a less of a pollution issue than latex or vinyl. Vinyl gloves are horrible. Do not use
Yeah.
vinyl gloves. They're heinous. Um, they have no give to them and they sweat. Whereas the
Yes.
natural gloves
Yes.
don't seem to sweat as badly. But I can have very good tactile control. I can still feel stuff
Yes.
really
That's
well.
what I like about being your bare hands because you really can feel what you're
Yeah.
pulling.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't do that.
Yeah, I know.
Don't do that. It's not a good, it's one of the things we talk about consistently because you could really hurt yourself.
Yeah,
Um,
it's funny you say that because I was I was weeding the other day and then I went in the house and I changed and everything and then I came back outside and I saw just a sprig of grass and I went to pull it up and I don't know what I got but something pricked me and I was like, "Oh, that was probably not smart." So I went inside and washed my hands right away, but I had like a welt on my finger
yeah.
for a day.
Yeah, you touch something. You touch
Yes.
something and you just never
Mhm.
know.
Yeah.
So it's just, it just be safe, be
Yeah,
safe.
I know.
I know it's like I don't garden without gloves on
Yeah.
anymore because
I usually always wear it. It was just that one time I was pulling it
yeah,
up and I'm like, oh,
yeah,
that was not smart.
yeah, the things we learn, the
Yes.
things we learn. So yeah, just the poison ivy is I remember during the pandemic, one of the pandemic, I know a lot of people, I
That's
know,
when I found it was during that because my
yeah,
sister, we had just moved into the house
yeah.
right before the pandemic. And then my sister came because we were so bored. And she's like, well, let me help you clean up your yard.
Mm.
So
Um, the pandemic, it was a terrible experience for a lot of people. I'm an introvert,
Hmm.
so it was okay for me
Yeah.
in terms of having to quarantine. It's like, okay, I
Hmm.
took out the last bit of lawn. I came up with a couple new products for my pottery business. I hung out with my cats. No one died in my family, so I know I'm
That's
very
good.
blessed. Um, Spent a lot of time, once we could get out of quarantine, spending time with just certain people that I knew were safe that I wouldn't otherwise get to see very much of because of what else was I going to do?
Yeah.
Um, but you know, where was I going with this? I don't even know. Um,
During quarantine, we talk about poison ivy, and then I don't know.
so yeah, I've lost my train of thought. It derailed.
Yeah,
Sorry about that.
that's all right. That's all right.
So, just be careful.
Yes,
Be
yes.
careful.
I have this plant in my yard. It's viney, and there's several things that come out of it, and they're little green, like triangle, and then they have a purple flower. And it must be invasive because it's everywhere.
Bindweed.
I
Look
don't,
up
you know,
bindweed.
it
Look
might be.
up
I don't know what it's called, but
look
I,
up bindweed.
it's
Uh,
strangling everything else. So I mean, I guess I
How
should pull
long
it
are the
up.
leaves?
They're just little leaves, just little ones. But then well, the stalk itself, it's got it reminds me of a vine
Okay.
because there's a
What
stalk and then
color are
there's
the
all these little
flowers?
leaves.
What
What?
color are the flowers?
They're like a purple blue,
And
and there's only
do they
not
look like a
a lot
morning
of
glory?
flowers.
Do they look like a morning glory?
I think so because when you were talking about violets, I was thinking this thing is similar to a violet, the way the flower itself is. Um, but it doesn't all have flowers until it's got like several of the leaves on there, and then
Oh
it'll
yeah,
have a
yeah.
flower, you know.
Okay. Look up two things. Do you have a pencil
Yeah,
or a pen and a piece of paper?
okay,
Bindweed, and there are a couple different species of bindweed, okay?
okay.
And nightshade,
Oh, okay. I've heard of that.
okay? Look those two up,
Okay, all
okay?
right.
All right.
And see yeah, because I want to pull them out because they're taking over everything, and I have all these other perennials that are supposed to come back that I'm like, what happened to them? I feel like they're getting strangled.
Um, the bindweed is harder to get rid of. Um, the nightshade is more discreet. It can be big and
Mhm.
aggressive, but if you get the root out, you got it. But bindweed sends runners out, okay?
Uh-huh.
I'm dealing with bindweed, two different kinds of bindweed at that garden at that church. One is the
Okay.
really tiny little flowers that have tiny little leaves with white flowers, and the other one at the back end of the garden is, the leaves are about 2.5 inches long, and it's a much larger scale plant. Um, and they are invasive. And this is the one instance when I'm dealing with an invasive species like this that I actually have used glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup, but you
Uh-huh.
don't use Roundup. You use the glyphosate concentrate. And what you do is you cut the plant down to one leaf
Hmm.
and you have a dedicated brush and you apply that concentrate to that leaf using that brush.
Uh-huh.
And that way, you're using the least amount of that material in the most controlled fashion possible.
Uh-huh.
No one should ever be spraying glyphosate anywhere for anything,
Right,
ever,
right,
ever.
right.
I have a friend down river who posted about she has Oriental bittersweet in her yard that was planted there by the previous owner. This is a horrible invasive vine.
Uh-huh.
Um, and she posted about this and she's like, she doesn't want to, she's like, she can't, she just keeps cutting it back. She can't see spraying the whole thing. So I said, what you do is you cut down every branch you can find, cut it
Hmm.
down to one leaf or cut it down to a stump if it's big. Cut it down to one leaf and paint that leaf, or if it's a stump, cut it down to the stump and paint that cut and then wrap it in plastic. This is a strategy we use for dealing with buckthorn
Oh, okay.
and other invasive shrubs. And the best time to do it is in the fall with woody plants
Mm-hmm.
because they're drawing everything down into the root system. So they're drawing that toxin right down into the root system, and that's going to kill it.
Sure, sure.
So that's how that's,
Okay.
I am not happy about using glyphosate. I have accepted the fact that it is one of the most important tools we have in our toolkit for dealing with invasive plant species.
Sure,
And
sure.
if we're going to be doing that, we need to do it in as responsible a fashion as possible, to use as little of that material as effectively as we possibly can.
Yeah, yeah. Sounds right.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.